Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk to you about the very serious topic of hardening the schools, something that is currently being mocked by the left wing across the nation, even though what they're doing is essentially taking Ted Cruz's bad explanation, his bad quote, and trying to make it as literal as possible while ignoring the overall intelligent implications of what he's saying and what other people who are actually speaking about it more clearly are saying should be done in order to protect our schools, like we do in other buildings across this nation and like we've already done in multiple different schools across this nation. But before we get into this, we got a sponsor today. We're going to throw it over to them. Let me do the throwing motion. Throw it over to them and then come back here and talk about it on the other side. Drones used to just be toys. I know this for a fact because I used to sell them at the mall when I was 19 years old and they were nothing special. But now they're major business investments. If you're a YouTube vlogger, if you're making a top tier big budget movie for a major studio, or if you're just a serious enthusiast, you want to get yourself a drone. And one of the drones that I recommend is this tactical drone right here. You see, this drone actually shoots in 4K. It shoots up to 60 frames per second, which means you can get slow motion. And right now, if you go to flyminidrone.com, you can get it for 50% off. Get your foot in the industry, learn to fly a drone that actually shoots 4K. Flyminidrone.com. Let's give it a test flight. So after any mass casualty event that involves guns, obviously the left wing seems to want to direct the conversation toward gun control. We hear all the time about common sense gun control. We hear about background checks, even though in this instance the guy did pass a background check and we actually did have common sense gun control in the state of Texas. Rifles are typically responsible for about 200 to 300 deaths total in the United States of America. Pistols are responsible for tens of thousands. Therefore, we have more restrictions on pistols than on rifles. Seems like common sense to me, but again, this is not what they're wanting to talk about. They're trying to frame their calls for ever increasing amounts of restrictions on guns as common sense, which is why they use a vague term, because this is what they want. One of the least common sense gun control proposals is the assault weapons ban, which allows guns that are virtually the same in every regard, the caliber of round they fire, how they fire rounds, but restricts certain modifications that don't do very much in terms of increasing the firepower or the deadliness of those guns. Perfect example of this, again, is the assault weapons ban from the 1990s to the year 2004-2005, when it ultimately ended up expiring. But one of the things that the left wing does that I find very unfortunate is they start to ignore other solutions or mock other solutions or other mitigation efforts that actually do make sense and would be common sense mitigation efforts, because they would help in scenarios, maybe not specifically like the one in Texas, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but scenarios where things go wrong. And a perfect example of this is the proposal to harden schools. Now, Ted Cruz had a quote where he talked about how there should be one entrance and entry point to the schools, and that entrance and entry point should be blocked off by the police, by school resource officers, and defended. And a lot of people took to mocking Ted Cruz because they said, what about fire codes? What happens if a shooter actually gets through that entrance? Because school resource officers aren't exactly the best of the best typically of police officers. No offense to the good ones that are out there, but I had school resource officers in my school and they weren't typically viewed as regular cops. They were viewed as people who probably couldn't work a regular cop job, that were kind of assigned to a soft job in order to prevent them from doing anything too damaging or messing up with an actual criminal. But the thing is, the context of Ted Cruz's quote and what Ted Cruz actually meant is very dependent on where you put the comma in what Ted Cruz said. So if you said that there should be one entrance, comma, and one entry to the school, then you get into absurd territory. But if he said there should be one exit / entrance to the school, and there are other exits in case of fires, etc., then this makes perfect sense, and let me explain why. What people are typically talking about when they're speaking about this more clearly than Senator Ted Cruz is the fact that we have doors, they're designed in a certain way, where you can't really open them from the outside, but you can open them from the inside. This means that you have single entry point but multiple different exit points to certain buildings. And buildings that you've encountered every day in your life have this basic security mechanism because it's far easier to monitor who's entering the building when these security functions are actually present. Also, in case there's a fire, these all function as emergency exits for a fire, so everybody can get out. So the idea that Republicans en masse are proposing anything that is going to violate fire codes or is going to trap children in the schools with these active shooter situations is just absurd in every possible way. What they're actually proposing, and pardon the expression, is a common sense security measure that is taken in a lot of places that we encounter in our day-to-day lives that is being deliberately misconstrued and mocked by the left wing because they have decided that unless they get the gun control proposals that they actually want, then nothing related to mitigating any of these situations is going to be sufficient. And honestly, it could be viewed as quite a sinister way of thinking about the issue because in reality, any mitigation effort that doesn't involve gun control that actually has a chance of reducing or eliminating these threats to our schools will actually weaken their justification for the gun control that they desperately want. So what you have is a creepy scenario where the people who are just anti-gun and don't really care about the people who die at the hands of guns are actually incentivized to not harden the schools. They're actually incentivized to make the schools more vulnerable, and thus they have to mock and they have to ignore and they have to shame all of these policies. Now, luckily for everybody, usually malice is secondary to stupidity, so most people are just mocking this proposal as door control or violation of fire codes or whatever because they don't realize that this is already implemented in a lot of schools across the country and a lot of buildings across the country, and it does make 100% sense. However, this is not a perfect solution. This is not a magic solution. This isn't going to solve all the problems, and there's a reason why I said that this wouldn't necessarily help the situation that went down in the state of Texas. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the shooter in that instance actually did enter through one of the very doors that I am describing.
We now know the gunman entered the school from a door propped open by a teacher.
You see, these doors are effective. They do keep people out and force them to enter through the main entrance where hopefully you have school resource officers there in order to confront the shooter, and hopefully because people can typically only enter through that one location, you can funnel kids out in an evacuation through all of the entrances that only open from the inside and not the outside. But the thing is, they're only effective as long as these doors remain closed, and unfortunately and tragically, in the situation that went down at the elementary school in the state of Texas, the door was actually propped open by a teacher, thus making this door the perfect and ideal entry point for the shooter in this instance. So while this is a common sense policy, it is not to be mistaken for a perfect policy. People prop those doors open, and unfortunately, while 99% of the time it's not a big deal, while 99% of the time it's not going to cause harm, this gave this person the perfect opportunity to get his way into the school, get himself into a classroom, and wreak all the havoc that he ultimately ended up doing inside that school. Now, on top of that security failure, on top of that teacher leaving the school open and vulnerable to somebody like this shooter in this horrific event, we also had the school resource officer that was supposedly there to defend the students not being present on the campus, who actually responded to the 911 call rather than being there in order to confront the shooter as soon as possible. On top of that, as we previously covered on this channel, we know for a fact that the cops were waiting outside for far too long against the protocol that was drawn up by the police in Texas, which says that you should breach immediately, walk past any horrors, and confront the shooter as the number one priority. So there's a lot of failures of current security measures that were present in there, and measures that people are advocating for, like hardening the schools, like having the school resource officers there, and similar. But that being said, just because they failed in this specific instance, that doesn't mean they're not effective. Again, having a teacher prop open a door is somebody making a security system more vulnerable that would have worked otherwise, not a condemnation of the security system overall. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify what the concept of hardening the schools actually means, because when I first read Ted Cruz's quote, I read it much in the same way that people in the media read it, because he said it twice, and it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And I started making fun of it, and I started talking about what if there's a fire. I started comparing this to movie theaters, and the thing is, movie theaters actually have the doors that I'm talking about in order to prevent people from coming in and watching the movie for free. So I think it's reasonable. I think it's sensible. I think it's logical for us to protect our children as much as we protect Hollywood from people watching their movies for free and costing them $13 in a movie ticket, or if you're in my state, $21 for a movie ticket. Anyway, I hope that clarifies the hardening the schools policy. Let me know what you guys think about this policy and about these security measures down in the comments below. If you like this video, you show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about actual policy to defend the schools. Till next time.